recently I was talking with this guy, and he had been going and researching stock, and he was researching individual companies, and he would spend a couple of months figuring out which company he wanted to purchase a stock from next. It was time consuming what he was doing, and he really put a lot of intention into it, and he had some growth, but he wanted to figure out a way to do it with less stress. And I basically told him, dude, just get some ETFs. They'll do the same thing you're doing, but you don't have to put in the hours. And he said, well, I kind of like doing it to a certain degree, and I don't want to pay someone else to do it. And I said, there's ETFs with really low fees. It's automatic diversification. And he was like, oh, well, I thought my diversification was to have a whole bunch of single stock. And I was like, I mean, you can do it that way, but I don't recommend it. And he didn't have any other kind of anything, like not even an index fund, nothing. I just couldn't help this guy understand why what he was doing wasn't helping him necessarily, even though it wasn't necessarily the worst thing he could be doing, it wasn't the best. Until I explained to him, think about how many hours it took you to decide on that stock. Think about how many hours you put in choosing it. And then think about what you could have been doing with those hours instead that would have earned you more. If you would have just gone with something that's a little more simple, and that would have, in the long run, turned out to have the same amount of profit. And he was like, oh, I never even thought about it that way. It never even occurred to me to think about what money I could have been earning instead. And sometimes it just takes a few minutes to help somebody really grasp that you're trying to help them. You're trying to make it better. And he said, well, maybe I should do a mutual fund. So I explained to him my issue with mutual funds, that people can just drop out of them. And so again, I tried to take him back to an ETF. And for some reason, he had this barrier to wanting to do an ETF. He had this bad image of one. It finally came down to, he had been listening to this podcast, and there were some finance bros on it, and they were picking individual stocks, and they were doing all of this really long, intricate, detailed investigating into companies, and they were saying, oh yeah, don't do an ETF. And what had actually happened was he was getting his information from one single source, a very biased source, and not listening to anything else. And it's fine if you want to get advice from a podcast, a YouTube channel. I mean, it's fine if you want to explore options, but exploring options means actually exploring. Don't just listen to one single voice, one single podcast, one single whatever, and say, okay, here's all my ducks going into this row, here's all my eggs going into this basket, because they could be misleading you, or they could be very well intentioned, not even trying to scam you on purpose or something like that, and still just maybe not know everything about what they're talking about. If you feel like you know better than me, by all means, go know better than me. That's fine. I am not offended. Quite frankly, I hope you listen to multiple voices. I would hope that no one would ever say, oh yeah, something you told me to do, you told me to go start a Roth IRA, and I did that. And you told me to go put an index fund and like 2 or 3 ETFs in there, and I did that. And the S&P 500 just did amazing, hit another record peak, and because of you, I made some money. So now I'm listening to your voice. I'm happy that happened, if that happened for you, but please don't only listen to my voice. Just because I happen to have a little bit of education does not make me the end-all be-all, and no one is. If you can gain from listening to, some finance bros on a podcast, absolutely go listen to the finance bros. That's fine. But balance that out with some well-measured other voice that's maybe not a finance bro. Like, it's so important to pay attention to staying in some semblance of balance. Just like you want to have a diversified portfolio and you want to mitigate the risk of making a big giant mistake that would cost you all your money, you want to diversify the amount of voices that you're listening to and that you're getting information from, and mitigate the risk that you're going to take really bad advice because you only listen to one or two people. I feel like this has to be said too often. For some reason, people seem, especially just as I've gotten older, the longer that people have had access to, I don't know, social media or to really biased information, the more they're just honed in on one or two voices, and they don't really seek external information to the norm that they just default to listening to. I'm not sure what can be done about that, but I do see it as problematic. It is limiting. You want to have an expansive set of knowledge. You want to grow and gain capacity, not constrict yourself in and isolate yourself in an echo chamber. It's so good for us to listen to multiple things, explore multiple things, try multiple things. It's so good for us not to say, hey, this is good enough every single time. It's okay to do that some of the time. I mean, we need structure, for sure. We need a good routine. It helps us feel stable and safe. But don't be so dependent on that you never try anything ever, and that you only listen to one guy telling you to spend ridiculous amounts of hours picking out each individual stock. Because yes, you can pick out a better stock, but at a certain point, at what cost are you really gaining after a certain threshold?